Also making news is the controversy surrounding the release of a new Michael Jackson album titled Michael.
This is one of the most controversial music projects ever.
The album many Michael Jackson fans have been waiting for, Michael hit store shelves today.
With 10 never-before-heard songs recorded before his death.
Producer Eddie Cascio says Michael recorded some of the songs in Cascio's home studio.
He recorded right there in my basement.
But diehard fans aren't buying what Cascio has to say.
I just listened to Breaking News, the new Michael Jackson song.
A lot of controversy about this song, and I don't think it's him. I really don't.
Everybody, all the fans, everybody's saying that they don't believe it's Michael.
This song is fake.
That's not Michael's voice.
It doesn't even sound like MJ.
It's not even his voice.
I'm flabbergasted.
It's definitely not Michael Jackson, I guarantee you.
That's not Michael. They can't bullshit me, man. That's not Michael's voice.
That ain't no Michael Jackson.
He does not sound like that.
Controversy is already swirling around the new Michael Jackson CD. Is the pop icon singing on every track?
People are out there trying to decide, is this Michael or is this not Michael?
I can tell you that it is Michael's voice.
Why do you say for sure it is him?
Because you can hear the authenticity in his voice.
Sony's Epic Records guarantees the album's authenticity.
We picked a side. We said it's Michael.
But according to TMZ, Jackson's family says the tracks are fakes, sung by a Michael impersonator.
Hello out there in podcast land, and welcome to another episode of the Black Jackson Estate podcast. I am user 1.5. I am joined today by user 1. User 1, are you there?
I'm here. What's up, everybody? It's another episode of the Black Jackson Estate podcast. We're glad to have you here. We're super glad to have our friend, Damien Shields, here as well. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Enjoy. If you're not new to the podcast, thank you for just holding us down for however long you've been listening. We appreciate you. Make sure you continue to like, subscribe, share this with somebody that you know would really enjoy it. And I know they're going to enjoy what's going to happen today. So I'm super excited.
Yes. And like user 1 just said, we have our good friend Damien Shields on. Damien, how you doing?
Very well. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. Thank you for joining us today, because we have a really great episode in store for you guys. We are going to be having an in-depth discussion with Damien about his latest podcast, Faking Michael. So before we jump into it, I want to go to user 1. User 1, we've both listened to this podcast. What are your immediate thoughts? Like, if you could sum this podcast up in 3 words, what would they be?
Jeez, 3 words.
Well, that was 3 words there. Jeez, 3 words.
It'd probably be, God damn it. You know, like, listen, it keeps you engaged, but it's a podcast that really makes you, it should outrage you in some ways. I think that was part of the point, because we are talking about crimes and theft and art and things like that. So, but very well done. I don't know that 3 words can really encapsulate how good this podcast is.
Ask a lawyer to give you the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, we gotta sell the boat, you know what I mean? And the skipper. So, I mean, but just an amazing piece of work. And I think I was really amazed at how much Damien was able to do with very minimal, like really self-funded, self-propelled in so many ways. So kudos to Damien Shields, because that's just a huge endeavor. And you can tell, if you've not listened to Faking Michael, you have to. I don't know, this is going to be full of spoilers, so you probably should listen to it first and then come back. But if you don't mind spoilers, they're going to be all over the place here. But a job well done. I definitely have to give kudos to Damien for just doing a magnificent job bringing a story that I think needed to be told to life in the best way possible.
Absolutely. And before we go any further, let me introduce you guys to Damien Shields. Damien is an independent investigative journalist, podcast producer, and author from Australia, whose area of expertise is Michael Jackson's life and career, with a focus on Jackson's creative process as a recording artist. Between 2010 and 2024, Shields spent 14 years researching, writing, and co-producing the Faking Michael podcast series. During that time, Damien flew back and forth between Australia and the United States to conduct exclusive interviews with Jackson's family and closest musical collaborators to uncover what Shields calls the greatest fraud in the history of the music business. To validate his findings, Shields worked with forensic experts, music industry insiders, and whistleblowers, and even a former FBI art crime investigator. Shields is the author of the book Michael Jackson, Songs and Stories from the Vault 2015, revised in 2018, which dissects the anatomy of Jackson's craftsmanship on a collection of unreleased songs which were unearthed in the aftermath of the pop star's death. Shields is the producer of the documentary-style podcast, The Genesis of Thriller, which weaves archival interviews with Jackson and his production team together with studio tracks and rarely heard outtakes to document the making of the biggest-selling album in music history, Thriller. Shields has also been interviewed by Billboard and Rolling Stone magazines, the New York Times, the BBC, and several other publications who sought his insight as an author and connoisseur of Jackson's work. And he is now here with us on the Black Jackson Estate podcast. This is the biggest one of them all, Damien.
It's funny too, because like this is not our Damien's been, so if you're new to the show, you don't know, but Damien's been on the show before. So this is just a further extension. We're friends IRL, so there's that. But yeah, welcome Damien Shields.
Welcome, Damien. First, before we even jump in, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been something that we've been talking about doing ever since you dropped the Faking Michael podcast. As my sister just said, for all of you viewers out there or listeners in podcast land, there are going to be a ton of spoilers in this episode. So if you have not listened to Faking Michael, go Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, download it, listen to it in your car, listen to all 13 episodes, and then come back so that you can get the backstage, back room, I don't even know what to call it. So you can get the scoop from Damien Shields. But Damien, thank you for coming in today, for hanging out with us. Listen, I washed my hair for you today, Damien. This is how important this was. And we are going to jump in, Damien, before we even talk about what's in this podcast series. This was a 14-year journey for you. Can you tell us what those 14 years looked like as you were researching the podcast, putting this all together, making, doing all the edits and all of that? What did those 14 years look like for you? And were there times where you felt like, is this worth it?
So the 14 years had different stages, different kind of seasons, basically. In the beginning, I wasn't making a podcast. I wasn't researching for the purposes of publishing any of it. I just kind of, I guess as the podcast explains, in the very early stages, I thought that if we would be able to warn Sony and the estate about what was going on with these songs, that maybe they would just change their mind and not release them. And, we had a little bit of time between hearing the material and the material being officially released that I thought, perhaps we could just intervene, stop the whole thing from happening before it gets off the ground. And when that wasn't successful, it then became, okay, so now they have gone ahead and done it and it's out. So how do we get them to take it back, remove it? And I thought research and information that we could present to people who may not have been aware of it would be helpful. But then as the process of digging in and researching and finding out what really happened unfolded for me, I realized that they already knew all of the information that they needed to know to make smart choices. It was their choice to ignore that and go the opposite way and justify it however they chose to justify it, but moving forward with it against all the red flags. So in the beginning, there was no intention of having any kind of project around it. It was just like, I'm angry, I can't believe this has happened, and let's try and stop it. Then when I realized there was a little bit more to it than met the eye, what was going on under the surface was a little bit more crazy than the way the estate and Sony wanted us to believe that it was. They kind of put out a statement that just was like, yeah, there were some questions, but then we, asked everybody and everyone said it was Michael, and so we moved forward. It wasn't like that at all. And when I learned that it wasn't like that, I was like, this is actually a story. This is not just who's singing and how did it happen. There's more to it. The moving pieces behind the scenes of how it actually happened and how it unfolded was crazy. So I thought maybe I can write a book about it. And I was writing a book about it for probably 5 years until books were no longer the most popular way to consume these stories and podcasts took over. And so then it was like, well, okay, people aren't going to read this, but they might listen to it. So at least people that I could reach directly. As I've always been thinking of doing it as a self-published project. I never thought of like going and, you know, working with a production company on doing a big podcast full of ads and, you know, with the intention of making $1 million and having a budget to do all this stuff. I always thought I'd do it myself. And yeah, podcasts seem to be kind of the way you could get it out there. And so from about 2017 onwards, I had the intention of doing it as a podcast and producing it like a true crime documentary, which is the way it ended up coming out. So, but there were moments where I thought it wasn't, not that it wasn't worth it. It was always going to be worth it to me. Just telling the truth is worth it. But maybe I thought that it wouldn't be possible to do it the way I wanted to do it. Like that it was just going to be not enough people coming on the record to say what was said, because what I didn't want to do was have the Damien Shields show. I didn't want it to be me behind a microphone, basically bitching and whinging about these fake songs and telling everything that happened through my voice. I wanted other people's voices because they are the people that experience this. It should be heard through the voice of the people who were there. And it did take a long time to get enough voices on the record to make this project worthwhile, the way I wanted to do it, the way I thought that the people who would listen to it deserve to hear it. And it shouldn't just be me, because if you want to hear me complain, I mean, I've complained enough. I've done that. Go on my Twitter, go on the MJ Cast, wherever I've complained. I've been complaining for a long time, and I think people are sick of hearing me complain. So it needed to be something more official and formal and professional.
Damien, to that point, why was it so important for you to tell this story, right? Because everything you just said, I mean, if to the folks who've listened to the podcast, which I imagine a lot of folks who are listening to this right now, they've listened to all 13 episodes. It is so well researched. It is a labor of love. The energy that it takes to pick up the phone and ask people to talk to you and for them to say no again and again, or the shut doors, the people being obtuse in some ways, or whatever, trying to scare you, honestly, from telling the story. Why was it so important for you to tell this story? You said it was bigger than Damien Shields, so why was it so important to tell this story?
Well, for me personally to tell it, or for it to be told? There's two separate answers there. Well, because nobody else was going to do it. If I didn't do it, and it's not just me, like, I want to preface the whole podcast that we're recording right now is this is not just me. I'm the one giving this interview now and answering the questions, but I'm answering technically on behalf of a team of people. There was multiple people. And so, the podcast could not exist without Dan Villalobos, who's the producer of the podcast. So without him bringing it to life, it literally is just me talking. And the clips of the interviews, but with no production, there's nothing more to it than just voices. So without Dan, the Faking Michael project doesn't exist. And then there's a team of researchers. And without those people collecting the evidence that they collected, I mean, we don't have all the pieces, because I personally did not get all the evidence. It wasn't all me. There were other people. So, but for me personally to say, why do I want to tell the story, is because I think if I didn't glue all of the pieces together and make it come to fruition, it wouldn't have. And so then we would be in a situation where today nobody knows what happened with the Casio tracks. Like, it wouldn't have happened. You would be still wondering how it all happened. And people would have their theories and their beliefs, and some people feel like they don't need to do research to know what happened here. Like, you can listen to it and go, okay, maybe it's this particular person singing and that's what I think, and I don't need to research, and it's done for them. But there is a story there, and I thought it should be told.
Is it fair to say that, there's a team of people, of course, in any endeavor that's this big? I think, folks, let's just assume there's more folks involved. And thank you for giving them a proper shout out, because there were a team of people here. But is it fair to say this was your brainchild, and that you assembled a team, and you were kind of the you're kind of the square one. You're kind of the square one of this whole thing. Is that fair to say? Not to discredit everything so many other people did to help you bring this to life, but would it be fair to say, like, this is a Damien Shields conception that then is brought together via a team of creatives and an investigative journalist, and then they bring it to the world 14 years in the making? Is that fair to say?
I would say that it was my vision to do it the way that it's been done, and I would say I'm the glue that puts all of those team members and keeps them together and brings it all to fruition the way you hear it, but everyone on the team was equally as passionate about doing it and telling it.
Because you
But
were all
yeah, I
Michael
mean,
Jackson fans, right? Like all of you are Michael Jackson fans
yes.
Yeah.
And we were all friends before this happened.
before this. Yeah.
Yes. So we've all been friends for at least 20 years, I would say.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I let Damien pop his collar. That's an old phrase, but I just want to make sure I give him his prop. But because, and I think it's just wonderful that you have the character to credit everyone, because you should, right? We probably wouldn't let you get away with not crediting the folks. But there's also something to be said to say that this was kind of my charge, right? That I then, and others who were passionate about it, brought and pushed forward to the forefront. So I just want to give you your props, Damien, because you and everyone on the team, it's such a huge endeavor. Again, guys, if you've not listened to the podcast, go listen to it. It will be very clear very immediately how much real work went into creating this story, right? And telling this story. So Damien Shields, I just want to give you your flowers while you're on the Black Jackson Estate podcast to say thank you so much, because it is a story that I think needed to be told. And it's told in a way that every single person can digest this. We know there was a court case that attacked these songs. That becomes a little more difficult for people to ingest because you're talking about, the legal world, and that's kind of boring for most people. They're not going to follow it in the same way. But a podcast, people do ingest in that way. And I'm sure so many people I know, I've suggested to people who listened and said, this is crazy. And they're not necessarily huge Michael Jackson fans. So I think maybe your intent and your goal has been met. We want to talk about that a little more at the end. But I think at least your impact has been felt so far. But
well, just on that point, the people I was trying to make the podcast for, it wasn't Michael Jackson fans. I knew that because it was me that was releasing it, Michael Jackson fans would listen, but I wanted to create something that if you weren't necessarily a fan of him or didn't know anything about him, you could still get on board with the story. Because if you take him out... If you take him out,
you don't know anything about Michael Jackson. Everybody in the world knows something about Michael Jackson.
Well, I'll give you one quick story, one very brief story. And I think I've told you guys about this already privately, but my next door neighbor, I've lived next door to this woman for 5 years, I think. And we say hello in passing in the corridor, and, she's going in her place, I'm going in mine. And we never really had any friendship, like hello and goodbye is the extent of it. But she knew I was working on a podcast. That was it. She didn't know anything about it. And for years, I'd say she'd say, oh, how are you? Oh, yeah, good. Just busy working on my podcast. And that was it. And then I saw her and she said, hey, how have you been? And I said, oh, it's been crazy these last couple of days. Like I've just released the podcast. And she said, oh yeah, send me the link. I'll listen to it. And she had no idea what it was going to be. I think she thought that maybe it was going to be me just like sitting there giving my thoughts of the world, my daily ponderings or whatever. I don't know what she thought it was going to be. But she listened to the whole thing. She binged the whole series and then came back to my house and banged on my door. She's like, I can't believe it. Why did Sony do this? This is incredible. And I was like, she had no idea that I was a Michael Jackson fan or that it was Michael Jackson related or anything. And she's not a Michael Jackson fan per se, but she was like, she knew all the details. She was like, when's the next episode? And so that's what I was trying to achieve with something that the everyday person could listen to, and it doesn't feel like it's a Michael Jackson project. Yeah. He's the subject, he's the victim, and he's in it, but you could take him out and put any other artist in there and it would still be the same story.
It would still be outrageous is what it would be. And
not outrageous.
It is outrageous. Yeah. I mean, I have clients that, and Damien, I told you this offline too. I have clients that when they come in to get their hair done, we talk about true crime because I'm really into true crime. And I'm like, I told one of them, I was like, you have to listen to this. I didn't tell him that I knew you anything because I didn't want it to sound like colored, but she came back her next appointment and she was like, oh my God, this is so crazy. She was like, I had no idea that she's not a Michael Jackson fan and she had no idea and she thought it was a great podcast. So I want to go to November 8th, 2010. That is the day that lives in infamy. That is the day that breaking news dropped live around the world simultaneously. True Michael Jackson style, right? Noon, I think it was noon New York time. Is that the time that it dropped? Or
midnight New York time.
Midnight New York time, right? True Michael Jackson style. We're dropping this at the same time all over the world. And Damien, you took a half a day so that you could go listen to Michael Jackson's new single, Breaking News. And you were disappointed
slightly.
As soon as you started listening to it, let's walk the listeners through that day and walk through like the reaction that you had, because I remember listening. Now, I didn't listen to the world premiere, but I got the CD when it was released, and I remember listening to it and what I thought. But let's walk the podcast listeners today. Let's walk them through what was happening as soon as you heard breaking news.
So you want my instant reaction to the song or the build up of the day? Because
So
there's a
whatever you want to give. I told you it's your world, Damien, honey. Whatever you want to do, we're going with you. So if you want to talk about your build up to it, we can do that.
Just for context, the reason I took half the day off was because the first song premiere that the estate had ever done was actually the song "This Is It" from the "This Is It" soundtrack, and they had built. That was going to be like this big premiere, and it was this first unreleased song that we'd heard since Michael had died. And I was at work the day that premiered too. That was a whole year earlier. And this is going to sound crazy, but I was like, I wanted to get a private kind of quiet spot so I could go and listen to it. And so I locked myself in the broom closet at work with my little earphones in, plugged into my phone, and like there was noise going around, and all my colleagues.
I'm sorry, hold it.
Time out.
The broom closet.
Vacuum closet.
Is this the janitor's closet? Like the?
No, this is the company's closet where we keep the vacuum and the broom
yeah,
and stuff.
Okay, so in America we would call it like the janitor's, the storage room,
No,
or what,
it's
like
the place. This was
there's a broom
because
in there.
There's no janitor, so it's just us. So it's like the staff. They spill their milk and cookies on the floor.
Okay, I got
go
you.
To the broom closet.
So they got to clean it up, right? So we got the broom closet there, and that was not a good experience. Like, and my colleagues, they knew I was the Michael Jackson guy, right? So they're banging on the door, like, oh, he's in the cupboard listening to his little song, like, boom, 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 boom. Like, no, it wasn't a good thing. So I was like, I need to take the afternoon off work. The next time something important happens, I'll take the afternoon off work. I'll go home and I'll sit with my headphones at my computer and I'll listen. And so that's what I did. And my instant reaction to the song was, that's Jason Malachi. Like, I heard the first like 3 words and I was like, holy shit, it's Jason. That's it. That was and I was angry and I was disturbed, like deeply disturbed. I felt quite ill. Like, when like something really unsettling happens and it's not like a death in the family where you cry and you're really sad. It's not like, something's like shocking, like you've witnessed somebody say something rude and you're just like, oh, I can't believe it. This was like disturbing in my stomach. Like, how the fuck could this have happened? Like, this is just really unacceptable that this could happen. Because it was obviously Jason, to me. As someone who had heard Jason's music for about 3 years prior to that. Like, being really familiar with Jason's music. And it was him immediately, and I was just like, what? How could this have happened?
Yeah, and then once you gathered yourself, you called your friends. Okay.
No. The first thing I did was I emailed Sony, and I said...
Oh, you emailed Sony before you called the...
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't even think the song had finished streaming. Like, I was probably 3 minutes into it, and I was, like, shooting off this email to the director of creative music at Sony. I don't know exactly what his title was, so long ago, but he handled Michael's catalog for Sony Music Australia. His job was Michael and Elvis for Sony Australia. And I sent him an email, said, like, is this a publicity stunt? Like, is this part of the promotion? Because that's not Michael, that's Jason Malachi. And he wrote back and he was like, I just checked with the guys in New York. They are saying it's Michael. And I wrote back and I just said, well, it's not. You've got to look into this a little bit more deeply because it's not, and we have to stop this. So that was my immediate reaction, and then I called the friends. Yeah.
You know what's funny? When the album was gonna come out, I'd stopped the message boards and all this stuff. When Michael died, I was just like, that was it for me. Like, I'd stopped all of that. I wasn't engaging in that way, but I knew what was happening because, you keep your ear low to the ground. You just have to. And so I knew it was coming out. I hadn't heard it when it premiered, when they gave when they dropped it, when you were in the broom closet. I didn't listen to it at that point, right? The album came out and I remember I had to go get it, right? Like, if you're a fan, you're going to go get it. I went and got it. I remember putting it in my CD player in my car. I know some of y'all don't know what in the world that's about because you're too young. I put it in my car and I remember listening to it, and I went with a friend of mine. We went to the store to get it. I was in college, and I just said, that doesn't sound like him. And I remember calling my sister and saying, some of this stuff doesn't sound like him. Right. So now, mind you, I'm a fan who has no knowledge of Jason Malachi or what's happening online. I was not aware of any of that. And I'm saying the same thing you're saying with extra information, right? So if someone says, well, it's self-fulfilling, that's not necessarily it, because a fan like me had not heard any of this information, was not seeing what was being said online. I put it in and said, that doesn't sound like him. But it was confusing because there were clearly songs that did sound like him, right? And it was like, that's him. This sounds weird, but maybe it's him, right? So you go to this place of confusion, right? So it's interesting.
It should be him, so.
Right, it should be him. Right? So
him.
You're naturally confused. But yeah, I think it's amazing how the fans immediately, and I just bring that up because we mean fans from different perspectives. Not everyone knew everything that was going on, but fans from different perspectives and different corners who had been listening to this voice for years were immediately, like, red flags were being thrown up, right? Immediately from different fans in different spaces. So I thought that was really interesting. And then you have folks like you who immediately started trying to figure out what you can do. I mean, you went as close to the top as you could get, right? You went straight to Sony Australia and said, hey, listen, there's a problem, right? And they took you seriously enough to go take that message back, which at this point probably wasn't the only message they were getting, right? From folks going, and I'm sure they were monitoring what was happening online with reaction. So that's really interesting. It sounds like the seeds of advocacy were immediately sown the moment you heard, like you said, you didn't even get to the, woo, this is breaking news, woo, you didn't even get to the end, you know what I mean? You didn't even get that far, and you were like, hold on a second. Who is this guy? Like, no, this is Jason Malachi. It is not Michael Jackson, right? So I just think that's amazing that fans all around the world in different spaces and time, we're not all synced up, y'all. So we're not all moving in the same way, but we all had this immediate reaction. And I think that really says something about the sloppiness. The sloppiness. It really does. It says something about the sloppiness of how this was put together and the disrespect. To think that we would not know something's not quite right here, right? And some people were immediately like you saying it's not Michael, it's this other guy, Jason Malachi. So
yeah, and I remember when she called me, I hadn't heard the song yet. I don't remember what I was doing that day, but I hadn't heard the song yet. She was like, I don't think this is Michael, and I took the stance because I hadn't heard it of like, well, why would they put out like a fake Michael? Like that doesn't make sense, right? When I heard the song. And I didn't know who Jason Malachi was at this point either.
Can I just ask one question? Are you talking exclusively about breaking news, or did you identify like the three?
So
with no information.
It was for me, and I'll let my sister answer, but for me it was because I think breaking news wasn't the first track. The Akon track is the first track. I can't even remember the order that they were in at this point. But I knew that Hold My Hand was Michael because we had heard that one before anyway. But when I heard Break It, because that was the one specifically, she was like, listen to this track. And I remember thinking that it was weird that he said Michael Jackson. That part was odd to me. I was like, that's weird. I've never heard Michael refer to himself in a song. You think about Privacy, Leave Me Alone, all of these songs where he's talking shit about the media, Tabloid Junkie. He never mentions his own name. So I just thought it was weird to say his name. So I listened to it the first time and I was like, it sounds undone, like unfinished. And then I listened to it again and I was like, I think it's him, but like it's supposed to be him, so why wouldn't it be him? I think that's the road I took. Keep Your Head Up. Keep Your Head Up. That just sounded awful. I mean, like LaWanda says, sounded like shit. It absolutely did. And Monster, I didn't think Monster was him, but I like the song. I'm not gonna lie. I like the song. I like the 50 rap in it. So I was willing to let that one pass. I was like, well, maybe this is Michael. It was a lot going on sound wise around that one that I was like, maybe this is Michael. But Keep Your Head Up, I was like, this can't be him. He would never sound as bad. Even if he was singing in the shower, he would never sound this bad.
That one didn't sound like him. Yeah, no, all three were identifiably easily like, this doesn't sound like him. And I remember when Best of Joy came on, which was right after so now everyone who bought the Fraud CD, let's go back and remember the order.
Yeah, I can't remember the order that it was in now.
I think that Keep Your Head Up was before Best of Joy. I can't remember. But I remember when Best of Joy came on, and it made me emotional. But then like keep your head up, which was kind of like in the same vein, it made me feel weird. I don't know. So I think that things were immediately clear that like, and I also didn't know like, maybe you go to this place that you talk about a lot in the podcast. He was working on these things. He wasn't finished. It's incomplete. So when you add all those things up, it supports trying to give some, benefit of the doubt here, right? Like these were not complete tracks. He was still working on this material. Maybe it's real and we're just getting what Michael would have never given us, which is an incomplete situation. So it's really nasty work.
It is.
When you stop and think about it, right? Like, and I think what Faking Michael does is takes you inside how this nasty ass sausage was made. Very sloppily so again, but it was a formula here. And they then pushed it out to the general public and said, and not just to the general public, to Michael Jackson's family, to his mom, to his kids, to his brothers and sisters, and said, hey, this is your guy. And it wasn't, right?
And it wasn't.
If you think it is, okay, but I don't think any of us think it is, right? It wasn't him. And I think that kind of leads me to another question that I have for you, Damien. I remember when the Jackson family came out and said this was not him. And I had my doubts, but when I knew Katherine Jackson was saying this was not her son, I was sold. That was it for me. Because I'm not gonna, where we're from, no, you gotta give some respect. That's his mother. I would never raise my voice in opposition to a mother who just lost her son in a very horrific way, right? Very tragic way, and say that you birthed this boy, raised him and nurtured him all these years, stood by his side, and you're telling me it's not him, and I'm going to kind of protest that. That's just not the way we do it in the South. But we're going to give some honor and respect to that moment, right? So when I knew that Katherine Jackson said, this is not my son's voice, I immediately said, that's not Michael Jackson. I didn't need to hear anything else. So your podcast is like cherry on the top. It's like the exclamation point. But to me, Katherine Jackson was all I needed to hear to believe her. I believed her.
And you have to remember with Katherine is that she was not opposed to celebrating Michael's music. She was not opposed to putting the album out, and she was going to benefit from the album. She's the prime beneficiary of the estate, so whatever money comes is going to be for her. She's the one who's saying, it's not him, I don't want this to go ahead, you can't release it. Like, she's actually in the vested interest position where she's going to maximize profits. Her saying that this is a fraud is only going to hurt her profits. It's only going to hurt the reputation of the project, and she doesn't want that. Like, there's not that she wants more money, but she's hurting herself by doing it. So the only rational reason that you could say that Katherine would do that is that if she was truly 100% within her convictions that it was not him.
That it wasn't. Why do you think...
It was the right thing to do to say that it wasn't.
It was the right thing to do, right? Because she didn't need any... Like, she was going to be... Money was not an object. And it never was for her, right? Michael always took care of his mother. And when he passed, he still did that. He held that obligation in death. Why do you think, because you talk about this in Faking Michael, because you were a part of this group too, why do you think it was so easy for so many fans initially to dismiss the initial protest of the family saying, hey, this is not our family member, this is not our brother, this is not my son, this is not my dad, this is not my uncle? Why do you think that so many fans, and this is, just your opinion, but you talk about this in Faking Michael, and I thought it was a point to make the full story, which you did so eloquently. Why do you think so many fans discounted what this family was saying initially? Why do you think that was?
There's a couple of reasons. So the first reason is that we've been groomed by the media to believe that the Jackson family leeches, they're jealous, they're greedy. There was a lot of racist undertones to the reporting about this family, prior to all of this happening, and after all of this happening in other situations as well. But there was a real effort from the media to make us believe that this family wouldn't just be speaking out because it's the right thing to do. There's got to be some other reason. They've got a motive. They want money. They're jealous that they're not involved. Their name's not on the credits, With Katherine, you couldn't say any of that because she was going to benefit and she was the top dog. She was the prime beneficiary of the estate. But with the brothers and everybody else, it could be so easy for the media to say, oh, he didn't include them in the will, so they're just jealous. He didn't record these songs with them, so they're just jealous. And this family, they have all of these songs, but not the real family, not Michael's blood. He didn't care about them. He was moved on from them. Then they're just jealous. And that was really easy to fall into a trap there, I think, when you don't have any context. Because prior to this, I didn't know Michael's family. I didn't have anything to go from other than what was being fed to us. And you can't trust the media fully, but in the context of this story, it kind of made sense somewhat. However, once you hear the material, you have to then take that new evidence into consideration and say, okay, I've now heard it and I'm actually hearing it the exact same way that they are. So maybe they're not all those things. But initially, before I'd heard the material, I did dismiss the Jackson family as all of those things: the greedy, the jealous, they're not benefiting, they've got some kind of, stick in their ass that they're not wanting to allow this to go ahead without destroying it. And the other part of it is that you just don't want it to be true, that it could be fake. You don't want Michael Jackson to be the victim of the biggest fraud in the history of the music business. You don't want that. And also, when you're being told that he has recorded 12 songs in 2007 with a family that prior to all of this was, a family that Michael loved and they loved him, and you don't want that to be true, that this could be fake. So you can some people can kind of say, well, I'm not willing to give 12 songs back. Like, we want those 12 songs. And there aren't that, there weren't that many Michael Jackson songs flowing at the time. The estate was clearly having difficulty finding fully completed material. And if this family has 12 fully completed songs,
let's roll.
We want them.
Yeah, let's roll. And
let's have them.
I want to keep on this line with the family. So in the first couple of episodes, you talk about these studio sessions, right? So we've gone back to the day Michael Jackson passed away, which was a day that I think everybody that's a Michael Jackson fan will remember for the rest of their lives. And now going forward, we've got Eddie Casio saying, listen, we've got 12 songs that are studio ready, like record ready, that Michael Jackson recorded before he died. I want you to talk a little bit about those studio sessions and the people that were called in. So you interviewed quite a few people who worked on these tracks. Michael Prince, Lawanda, is that her name? Lawanda.
Yeah, Lawanda.
Lawanda, who was the manager of Teddy Riley, who was a producer on like Hollywood Tonight and a couple of other tracks. I want to go back to that point where they have these songs, they're working on these songs, and they realize something is wrong. In your interviewing these people, what is like kind of the overall theme that you got from especially Jason Prince? He had a lot to say. I'm sorry, Michael Prince.
Yeah.
He had a lot to say about these songs. What do you have? What is the overall kind of theme that you got from them?
The theme that I got from them was that everyone had come into this project excited and energized that they're going to be working on the first posthumous Michael Jackson project. And people like Michael Prince, who had genuinely recorded unreleased stuff with Michael in his final years, they were involved and they were working on the stuff that they had left over. Like, they had no reason to believe there would be any, shady business going on with this project. And even Teddy Riley and Terrell Jackson, like when they came on the project, there was no reason to believe there would be a problem with this project. So everyone's intentions started good and the energy started good. But the moment that people heard these songs, there was an immediate, something's wrong. So the common thread was that nothing felt right. Different people had varying degrees of, conviction with how strongly they believed it really wasn't him, or if they couldn't tell one way or the other, or whatever. But everyone recognized that this was not a traditional Michael Jackson project. These tracks and the way that they were assembled and the way that they sounded and things that were in them that shouldn't be there or things that were not in them that would normally be there, everyone had the same kind of bad feeling about what was going on here. Yeah. But there was nobody waving the flag, insisting that this is definitely him, other than the people that provided the songs to Sony and the estate, the people who created the songs. They were obviously saying it was definitely him.
Yeah. And I want to say, Lawanda, I don't know her. I feel like I know her after listening to this podcast. She had so much information about what was happening in the studio. And the music industry is such a closed world. They kind of run in their own circles. And so to have somebody who was in the studio working with Teddy Riley, listening to these tracks, making negotiations, tell the stories that she was telling was just absolutely compelling and well done for getting the information that you got from her. Part of what she was saying though was they had called Terrell in, which I had no idea Terrell worked on this album at all. He didn't get any credit for anything. And Terrell was kind of the first person to be like, this is not right? This is not my uncle. We've already kind of covered this. But Terrell was a part of this project, right? He lent his voice to Hollywood Tonight for the rap part. Teddy wanted to keep it authentic or whatever words he was using. Why do you think, and I can't ask you to speak for Teddy Riley, but Teddy Riley seems to be in my opinion, a huge villain in this story. And this is just my opinion. Teddy Riley did what he did for whatever reasons he did them. I'm asking you, though, Damien, what are your impressions of Teddy Riley? After talking to LaWanda and all of this information that we have from her, what are your impressions of Teddy Riley? And what do you think? Like, do you think that this was something that his career would have been over had he not done this? Like, what's the motivation here? Because I know it's easy for us as regular lay people to say, it's wrong. I wouldn't have done it. It's not the right thing, right? We could have all done what you did and said, this is not Michael. Let me email Sony. We didn't all do that, right? So why did Teddy Riley continue down this rabbit hole even after he knew? I mean, he went on Oprah. He did a lot.
Shout out to Teddy Riley.
Shout out to Teddy Riley.
Shout out to Teddy Riley.
You come talk to us, sir, if you want to.
Teddy did do the same thing that I did initially. He had LaWanda emailing Sony and the estate saying, some of these songs MJ's not singing. Like, where are the raw vocals? We want to pull this apart. We want to look at this and dissect it. We want to hear everything separated because there's obviously some like editing going on here. And he initially did try to kind of wriggle out of it. And he even sent an email demanding that his name not be associated with the vocals. He said, I'm happy to say this is music produced by Teddy Riley, but I want it to be clear that I had nothing to do with these vocals. And the powers that be are the powers that be. They're powerful people. And I think that he saw how much money he was potentially not going to make if he didn't follow through and get in line. And I think that there was some persuasive argument from people about what outcomes he might have if he didn't, say what they wanted him to say. And I guess the easiest terminology you could use is you sell your soul to the devil and you start changing your story. And like LaWanda says, at one point when he was sitting when it's the producers and it's just kind of, the people, his peers, he's saying, yeah, I agree with you guys. Like, this is, the vibrato is wrong, or, this is wrong, that's wrong, it just sounds wrong. I don't feel good about it. And then when you're in a room with John Branca and Howard Weitzman, and they're saying, so Teddy, tell us what you think. And he says, I think it's Michael.
And listening to Faking Michael, it felt like it was really hard for Teddy Riley to stand on business when it came to these songs.
Teddy Riley needed some money.
He just flippity flopped. He could not get himself to be in a place of conviction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he was lukewarm, and then in some instances he was firm. But then, like you said, when more powerful people maybe entered the chat, he was like, oh no, y'all are right. I'm, not really worried about it. So, And I think this is actually not to pick on Teddy Riley, because all I want to do is zoom, and a boom, boom. Okay. But I'm saying, because I'm not trying to single him out. There's a bunch of people that are complicit, right? And Faking Michael goes through that, and you name names. So shout out to Damien Shields for naming names and pulling receipts and snatching wigs.
That's what we're doing in 2025, honey. We
snatching wigs in 2025. We don't have time for it. So shout out to your podcast, which really does that in a very compelling and persuasive way. Like, it's very difficult to come out of here and say, oh, I'm so sure these are still Michael's vocals. If you can come out and say that you didn't listen to it, or you are an op. I mean, I don't know which one it is, but it's one of the, either you really didn't listen to it and comprehend, or you're an op. You asked about Teddy, and Teddy has like a really interesting story. Guys, listen to Faking Michael if you've not. Here's kind of the details of Teddy's story, right? Because of course, money is the motivation for every single player involved here, save the Jackson family. I'm going to put them over here. That was not their motivation, but pretty much everyone else. And let's put LaWanda over here. She had a vested interest financially because she's Teddy's manager, but her integrity was greater than her financial payday, right? She stood on her integrity. So shout out to LaWanda for doing that. She's one of the players here that does do that throughout, and you can hear the passion in her voice throughout the podcast. So in the vein of what my sister did in bringing Teddy up, I want to ask this question, Damien. I'm going to let Teddy rest.
I know what, okay.
I'm gonna let Teddy rest.
Because I ain't finished with Teddy, but we can move on. Go ahead.
Listen, I said this because I thought Faking Michael did just a masterful job of storytelling. Every good story you've got some heroes, you've got some villains, and you got some victims. Tell us, who are the top heroes, villains, and victims in Faking Michael?
Well, as far as people that were involved with the actual saga when it was unfolding in the moment, Terrell and LaWanda are the biggest heroes, in my opinion. LaWanda is such an interesting person. She has like a hard drive memory of facts and dates and times, and everything you hear LaWanda say in this podcast, like every date, every moment, he went from the studio and he went over here and then I told him don't do that and this happened on Tuesday and then Wednesday this. Trust me when I say I've verified that every single thing she said happened to the second the way she said it. She has emails from the production of the album which basically chronicle the entire thing from the day Teddy arrived, like from before he arrived, from the day he was asked to come in and work on the project. So LaWanda receives an email saying, hey, we want to get Teddy for the project. She has that moment all the way to the final day when the album is released. And everything she said in that podcast can be verified as being factually true. Huge hero. She has nothing to gain from doing this and potentially something to lose. And the same with Tarrell. Tarrell already lost what he had to lose before the album had even come out, basically. Like, Tarrell was initially quite scared to speak out in the behind the scenes moments before these songs had ever hit the public. He was saying, like, it's not Michael, but I don't want to get involved with the fight about it. I'm telling you it's not him, but I don't want to fight against the Michael Jackson estate and Sony Music. And LaWanda was the one that said to him, look, this is your chance to actually say how you feel, tell the truth, perhaps affect a positive change on the situation. Like, if you really believe that's not your uncle and you really don't think this should come out, you have a moment right now, you have a choice, you have to choose. You either voice that concern to the powers that be, or you don't. And he did. He chose to do it reluctantly, but he was promised that it wouldn't affect him negatively, and that turned out to be completely untrue. And he had, at that moment, he had like songwriting deals. He was working on songs as a writer for other artists. He had multiple deals on the table, and they all vanished. The second he spoke out and he decided he was going to actually stand up for Michael and stand up for the truth, those deals disappeared. And he suffered greatly from it. Not just suffered financially, but the mental anguish. He had then reporters teeing off with him in the media, like making him the focus of like this jealous Jackson family, this greedy Jackson family situation. The media was writing that Tarrell and his brothers were jealous that Michael had chosen to record with the Casios and not with them, which was just not true. So, but you know, like I said, most people get what the media feeds them, and that's the gospel. Most people don't go behind the headline and look what actually is the backstory of this. They'll just read the headline and go, okay, I'm now informed. And that's how the media should operate, but it's not how they do operate. And so, yeah, he suffered greatly.
To your point, Damien, even the Michael Jackson fans were not immune to that kind of devious tactic of the media, right? Because the Michael Jackson fans were then parroting these same talking points about the greedy family and they're jealous. And that's interesting because this is the same group. This is a fan base that is very big on don't trust the media. Yet this narrative was not dissected. It was not questioned. It was kind of hook, line, sinker. And you talked about some of the reasons you think that was there. And some of that is probably true, right? We're susceptible to something and sometimes it's subconscious. There's a racism element here too, because, right, like I told you, as soon as I heard Katherine Jackson say, that's not my kid, I said, okay, bet that's not her kid. And I don't need to hear anybody else tell me anything about this. That's not her kid. So, you know, all of these things are happening. And the fan sometimes, as much as we try to do our due diligence, sometimes we get it wrong and we have to look at why we're getting it wrong and then do better. And I think this is a moment where the fans did do better, right? The conversation became more nuanced after this when the fans started talking about the family, right? You just don't get to blanket them as these greedy people. And it's also a weird sort of line to take. You go, so the fans are greedy. Michael's holding up signs before he died about Sony sucks and the exploitation of artists. And you talk about this in Faking Michael. Michael talks about specifically the exploitation of Black artists before he dies. He goes on a real trip. Now, some might say he only did that, right, because of what happened with him and Invincible. Maybe that's so. We don't know his full motivations. Maybe he always thought these things and knew them, and that's probably true, but just did not vocalize them for the reasons you talk about with even why Terrell didn't want to get himself involved, right? If I do this, I will be impacted. And I don't want my art and my future to suffer. But in Michael's lifetime, he makes a big stand and statement about exploitation of artists. He starts to sound more like Prince, right? The artist Prince. And he starts to talk about that exploitive space in entertainment and in music. And he uses himself as a great example, but he talks about all Black artists, right? At that point, Faking Michael goes into that, right? Because it's so interesting that Michael's talking about that in his life, and then look what happens in death, right? It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that comes to fruition in death, the thing he's talking about and standing on in life. How do you, did that ever strike you as just like mind-blowing, right? When you're putting this all together and then you look back at Michael Jackson's own words, literally in the last years of his life, in the last decade of his life, going after the thing that your podcast and your story, your investigation is pushing forward. You're literally advancing his theory, his argument, his exposing of in the music industry. Did that ever like click for you at some point where you said, wow, we're piecing together the thing that Michael stood on in the last years of his life?
Yeah, I think from the beginning, it was always in, top of mind. Like, this is what he said. This is just another chapter in the story he tried to speak about. Interestingly, though, the way the podcast addresses that is that, we were in production on the podcast for 4 years, and the Sony Sucks section in episode 1 was only inserted probably a month or two before the podcast was released. It wasn't there to begin with. So I had a dilemma in the way I was going to posture this publicly. I didn't want to be perceived to be that I was biased around or influenced by these other stories or conspiracy theories or actual conspiracies or whatever that had existed and floated around the notion of Michael Jackson. So like Michael Jackson's will, Michael Jackson's conflict with Sony, and all these different things that you could go down a rabbit hole with and try and say, dissect them all individually. I didn't really want to be like, oh, he's the Sony Sucks guy, so like, of course he thinks the songs are fake because Michael said Sony sucks. Now Damien doesn't believe anything that Sony does is good. And it wasn't like it has to be fake because Michael said Sony sucks. And I really wanted to try and find a way where I would be able to still say that Michael did say those things and that they were relevant to the story, but the conclusion wasn't because of those things. The conclusion of the authenticity of these songs had no bearing on the fact. If Michael would have said that Sony was the greatest company on earth and that he was forever indebted to Sony for doing the best they could with Invincible or whatever, if he could have said the exact opposite thing, my ears would never have said that those Jason Malachi songs were Michael Jackson, and my personality would never have accepted them as Michael Jackson songs or thought that it wasn't a big deal. So that whole thing had no bearing on my conclusions, but it was important, especially in the context of the fans were willing to take the media's version of the Jackson family as, greedy and whatever until they heard the material, and then it was like, oh yeah, and now we remember what Michael said, Sony sucks. I just wanted to insert it in there because it was like, let's not forget what Michael said. And then it's interesting how the fans changed after hearing it. It was just all part of the puzzle, and I didn't want it to say that one thing informs the other, but they were all kind of there, and they shouldn't have necessarily been ignored. It would be remiss to not mention that Michael had problems with the record company that released fake songs after he died.
Michael was breaking Sony headphones simply because they were Sony headphones. This is how
Michael had a hard beef with Sony.
He was
Tommy Mottola.
And Tommy Mottola, right?
Yeah.
So but chef's kiss for adding that. I think that it informs the story, right? Because Michael's almost at this point, for lack of a better phrase, like speaking from the grave in this moment, right, of what's happening to him, because he had already told you, this is what happens in the music industry. This is what happens to artists. This is especially what happens to minority artists and Black artists. And there's a history here. And then for him to become a victim of the thing he was speaking out about, I just thought it was a great tie-in. So I'm glad that in the last, in the 11th hour of getting this podcast together, Faking Michael incorporates that, because Michael was in the mic like this. He was in the mic like this when he said Sony sucks. He wanted you to hear it. Like, he wanted it to be really clear that, listen, I'm telling you what I know. And now maybe his motivation was what they did with Invincible, right? There's a lot there, and there's, that's beyond the scope of the discussion, right? But the point is still, he was the biggest artist, even for a man who had gone through all he had in the past, 5 or 6 years, even with Invincible not doing the numbers that he'd anticipated and it being deemed a commercial flop, he's still the biggest artist in the world. So for him to get in a microphone like this and say, Sony sucks.
Very, very devilish.
I hate Damien.
You know, it's funny.
He said it, right? Like he said it.
But see, when you bring that up, and as I was listening to the podcast, Damien, I sent you a voice note. Like while I was listening, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you went back to Sony. I'm so glad you did this. Like, I'm so glad you included it because it, like my sister said, it really brings full circle what's happening right now. Sony is not an innocent bystander here, right? Sony is also complicit in releasing fake tracks, right? They did not do their due diligence.
Sony and the estate have an interesting place in the story. They are both complicit and victims.
Yeah, which
they
makes
have
it
both
difficult.
situations
So you think
going
that
on.
you really think they're victims? See, I
Yes,
don't know. I think
yes,
I took away
I
something
do.
different.
I
but,
think they're
okay,
victims too.
You thought they were
Yes.
victims? So
Yeah,
and
they
it's
are victims
interesting
because they could have initially gone the
Believed.
opposite route. They could have initially said, listen, the whole Jackson family is saying this is fake. The producers we're bringing in, they're not convinced that this is Michael. They're raising all of these red flags. They could have said, we're going to get the FBI to look into this.
Investigate. Yeah.
Yeah. They could
Yeah.
have said, we believe we're the victim of an art forgery here. Like, we need to figure this out. But they, at that point, they had been defrauded because they'd invested money. They'd been sold a bill of goods that was fake, right? Like the FBI investigator in the podcast says, Sony and the estate are victims because they were sold a bill of good that was fake. And if you can prove that they are fake, you can prove that Sony and the estate were victims. What they then did after that
Makes them complicit.
makes them complicit.
Makes them
So they're
complicit.
complicit in the fraud of which they were initially victims of. And
Yeah.
I don't know legally if that makes them no longer victims, if they're happy with the fact that they were defrauded and they wanted to go along with the fraud.
That's the right. It's not. That's the problem, right? It's the go along with at that point. For you to then, and Faking Michael does a good job of showing where you're. So I said, who are the victims? Who are the villains? And who are the heroes? Right? We got
I still
the
have
heroes.
to finish that answer. Yeah.
Yeah, you still got to finish it, right? So we're midway through it, right? So we have some heroes that you're sure, right?
There's
Terrell
one more
Jackson.
hero before I move on.
Uh-huh.
Two more heroes. And I won't be too long-winded with this. Vera is obviously a hero, a huge hero. I think the catalyst of actually getting this podcast and this story and this whole thing to where it actually ended up is her. We all wanted it to end up like this, but there was no one in the world willing to file a lawsuit, to hold them accountable, and to get those songs actually removed. We're all bitching and screaming, and, you know, I'm on my Twitter, like, banging out aggressive, angry tweets a decade later, but Vera's the one that
Per
she was
usual, Damien. Per usual.
She was in, yeah, per usual. She was the one who really wanted to do something about it, and she did. So she's a huge hero. She can't be understated. She's perhaps the biggest hero in the whole thing because she was unwavering to the very end. And the songs are no longer on the album because of her. The other hero is Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis is the producer that worked with Jason for a decade prior to all of this happening. And he's the only person who was in a position to actually speak with true total authority on who was singing on those songs, if it wasn't Michael and if it was Jason. And he did. The moment he heard it, he went online, he was on Twitter, he was on YouTube, he was saying, this is Jason, the vibrato is Jason, the tone is Jason. You know, it's obviously been pitch corrected to sound as good as it can be, but Jason sings off pitch, and if you pitch correct Jason, that's what it's going to sound like. So, you know, like he was really putting it all out there, and no one took him seriously. Like it could have been, you know, a dozen fans in the community who took Tony Curtis seriously. There were some people who were dismissing Tony Curtis's testimony that this was Jason, even though this was a guy who had literally known him for a decade prior. And he became a hero in the moment he spoke out and raised his voice, but he became even more of a hero when he made disclosures to me about what had happened after the fact. You know, he didn't just let it rest. He brought this up with Jason. He confronted him, and he
Was that
then
I
made...
can't confirm or deny. That was that whole...
Who even says I can't confirm or deny? You know, like...
That's a
if you
compliment.
say I can't confirm or deny, you did.
And like again, I think it's just important to like highlight again the passion in these voices. Like you know,
that's why it needed to be a book or that's why it couldn't be a book. It could not be a book.
You cannot discount, you know, and even in my, you know, and what I do, if you got to put somebody on the stand or something, you're going, are you believable? Do people believe what you're going to say? These are folks who become very believable just in the way they are convicted in the things they are saying. So shout out to Tony Curtis, shout out to Vera, who was like, listen, I'm about that life, so let's just see what's gonna happen here. I mean, and
my $12 back from Walmart that I spent.
I think my $11.88. You know what I'm saying?
It was 12 something with tax.
And let's not talk about my emotional distress because that's I mean, I got to add some zeros behind the 11, before we get to the 88. I still want my 88 cent back, but you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot. I mean, the fans really went through a lot here. I think you're right. That's excellent. Those are all heroes. Of course, Terrell specifically, but the Jackson family in total are heroes here for raising their voices. Because LaToya says something. Guys, again, if you have not listened to Faking Michael, you got to go listen to Faking Michael to understand this story and the conversation we're having. LaToya Jackson says something. All of 3T are standing in unity. Sometimes Silence says something. Janet said not a goddamn thing about this album. She didn't have shit to say about it, and I'm trying to think back. She didn't have anything to say about it.
Mother don't say much unless she
was over them anyway after everything that happened when Michael passed. But you don't see what you didn't see from the Jackson family was anyone stand up to say, no, that's our brother. Right? You have Jermaine questioning it in private. You have Randy going, I wrote songs with Michael. I recorded with Michael for years. I mean, if anyone was as close to Michael as far as like talent and songwriting and vocal ability, I think it was Randy, right? And he incorporated Randy so much in his recording process, growing up, and it's especially in those early years. And Randy's like, that ain't him. So no one in the Jackson family steps up and publicly says, that's Michael. I know that there's some dissent here in the family, but that's actually him. So what's not said is also just as important as what is said. Not a single Jackson says it's him. There are some that very forcefully say it's not him. And then you have all these folks who would know other people's voices stepping up and saying, that's that voice. That is not Michael Jackson. And yes, some pitch was off, y'all. Like, I was like, hold on a second. Listen, Michael got his notes right. He really hit the spot on his notes. And so all these things are culminating, right? And it's like the perfect storm, right? So you have these heroes. Let's talk about your villains, because you put the entities in there, and entities being legal fictions means let's tear that back and say we have John Branca, we have John McClane, we have Howard Weitzman, who is the attorney for this situation. We have Sony, which these are the executives. These are the people, right?
Are these your villains or are these Damien's villains? Because
He already said
Damien
the
has not confirmed nor denied.
He said the estate and Sony were villains and victims. So I'm just going with the villain side right now, right? Well, you said they're victims, right? Because at some point they become complicit. Here's my thing. I just had to put them. I want to hear your take, Damien. But I had to listen to Faking Michael. I had to put them firmly into the villain category, because once they became aware, these are not idiots. Everybody went to school. Everybody learned to read and write. Everyone went and got higher education. Everyone's been in the business for 11,000 years. Y'all are old. You know what I'm saying? Y'all are not new to the game. You're true to the game. I'm not gonna give you sucker status. You're not suckers. So once you became aware, you then turned the page and just said 10 toes down. We got to run 10 toes down with this story, right? We cannot turn around and go back. At that point, to me, whatever victimhood I could give you is erased, because we know why you couldn't go back at that point. A, you look silly, but that's not your real reason in my mind. It's the money. The money. The simplest answer is always the answer, right?
Everybody's playing go along to get along at this point. You know what I mean? Like, everybody's just like, okay, let's just keep going. We've made it this far. Like Forrest Gump. I've run this far. Might as well keep going.
Might as well keep on running.
I feel like
that's
what
Damien,
happened here.
What do you think? Because I can't, I feel like if they were a victim, the balance of victim and villain, it's more villain than victim. But it's your story. So I want to hear, who are the villains here per Damien Shields, the expert on this topic?
It goes without saying that James Port and Eddie Casio conspired to defraud everybody. That's the estate and Sony, that's Michael's fans, and then we have Michael himself, who can't be forgotten as a victim of art forgery. So those two guys clearly are the masterminds of the conspiracy to defraud, and the method was fake songs. So that doesn't need any explanation or elaboration. They're hardcore top tier villains. Like you said, in their crosshairs, the first people they wanted to victimize was the Estate and Sony, because that's the only way they're getting paid. James Port and Eddie Casio don't get paid unless they can victimize the Estate and Sony. So that's why they are victims, right? And the reason that they are villains is because they, as we discussed earlier, they had 1 million red flags raised from people who had no reason to raise a red flag that wasn't really there, and then decided to push back against not only the people who are raising red flags, but their consumers, the fans, the people who are going to buy this album and who are going to enrich the people who are exploiting this material, whether it's him or whether it's not. We had a very clear consensus about what this material was, that it was fake. Not everybody said it was fake, but the consensus was very strong that it was, even among the fans, the consumers, and they still pushed it on us. So at that point, they become villains. Now, there are varying degrees of villainhood or villainness, or villainship. I don't know what the word is. Villandery, yeah, exactly.
Villainship.
Villainship. Yeah.
Degrees of villainship. Okay. Yeah, well, there
There's
are
different
levels
degrees,
to this. There's
because
levels to everything, right? So yeah, you're
if
right.
you say the estate has multiple people, they have different people with different
and there you go.
participations in
Right.
this and different. Right.
Yeah.
So we've got like John McClane eventually shut up and took his money, and like I have a great quote of LaWanda saying that. I don't know why I didn't include it. You can't include everything in these things, right? You've got sometimes you do a 5-hour interview with someone and you end up clipping.
You
them
should
down
just
to...
release the unreleased LaWanda
It's not
tape
possible.
because
It's
I
not
love
possible.
LaWanda, girl, you gotta come
Girl, on
talk
the
to us.
show,
We
girl.
gotta talk to you. We gotta
Yeah,
talk
it was
to
not
you.
possible. Yeah, McClane, he said the songs were fake. He tried to stop this from happening, but when it was too far gone and it was too late to turn back, he didn't turn back. He just kept going with his pockets full, and never raised it again. You've got Howard Weitzman and John Branca. So Howard Weitzman is the attorney of John Branca. So technically Howard Weitzman is working on the orders of whatever John Branca wants. So Howard isn't necessarily out there running his own operation and doing the things the way he wants to do them. But, he has a duty of care to, I guess, tell the truth at least, which he didn't do. So in no way, shape or form. Like he released like an essay length letter about his investigation of these songs and barely a word of it was true. So yeah, and then you have John Branca as well, but they're all, I do have some degree of, they're all defrauded. They were the victims of a fraud. And I think pride, ego, hubris, these things can be very, very strong and very difficult to overcome, especially when you have a reputation that you want to uphold, and by making a concession that you were, so easily victimized by these obvious forgeries that you couldn't tell one way or the other whether they were real or not. And, that is a factor in this, that we just don't want to admit that we were wrong. We just can't bring ourselves to admit that we were wrong. And I don't think the money is as big a factor as you do, Nikki. I don't think it was the number one.
Always about the money.
I think it was the second factor, a very strong factor, but I think it was the second factor below pride and ego. And inability to swallow what they initially thought and then say it was wrong. And that, because the thing is that the money wasn't that much money. In the scheme of Michael Jackson, the Empire.
Time out.
In the scheme of Michael Jackson, the Empire.
Okay, go ahead. The Empire. Okay.
What they spent on the songs and what they could make from releasing the songs, or what they could have made from releasing different songs. When you compare it to how much they're going to make from a Cirque du Soleil show or a musical or a biopic.
We ain't got there. Yeah, we ain't got there yet though.
Well, it was all in the works. It was all
in the works.
Cirque du Soleil was brewing under the surface already. Like there was hundreds of millions of dollars to be made, and just tens of millions of dollars with the album.
I'll say this: me and Damien are on separate sides of the fence on this one, but we want to know what you guys think. Okay.
Put a poll.
At the camera.
We want to know what you guys think. Okay. All right. Is it the money? Is it just pride and having to take that L and say you weren't as smart as you thought you were? Okay. Now Damien thinks pride is the number one factor. I think it always leads back to money.
I think
because
these are men.
People
are
greedy as shit.
It's pride.
And
these are
you
men.
think it's pride?
It's pride.
Okay.
These are
They
grown
think
men.
it's pride. I don't know.
But then you can convince Teddy Riley to go along with it. For him, it's money. It's not pride for him.
Yes.
For him, it's money. But then you've got Teddy Riley on radio, on Oprah, everywhere else, and he's saying it's real. So, okay, now we've got like this, maybe we can really sell this because we've got Teddy Riley on Oprah saying this is real. So then it's like,
anytime you go
that
on
money
Oprah,
is more appealing when you've got...
Oprah is the end-all, be-all here. So,
it's a lot. I just think to myself, I kept thinking and listening to Faking Michael, and you guys keep saying, why you just keep saying Faking Michael? Because I have to keep saying it so you listen to it. I kept thinking when I was listening to Faking Michael, but okay, they got these songs with this very like hallelujah moment. Michael recorded a whole album in a basement. Wonderful. Okay. We believe it. 100% we believe it. Okay. We got the songs and we listened to them. John Branca had worked with Michael for over 30 years. So, and Howard Weitzman had been in this world as well for decades. John McClane, same thing. You guys heard this and thought to yourself, that's definitely Michael. This is before you brought anyone in to help with this. You said to yourself, That sounds like him.
Look, I want to piggyback.
I'm just
off of
saying.
that.
I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe they
I
did
wanna
because they're
piggyback
also
off of that.
old. So maybe John's. I don't know if John got hearing aids or whatever, and like maybe it
He
was turned
does.
down low. Okay,
Yeah.
now I'm not trying to be funny because people got hearing problems for real.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
let me
yeah.
just-
But
let me-
it's a
let me
genuine.
be cute. But I'm just
it's
saying,
a
right?
genuine.
Like,
it's a genuine question
I'm
though.
asking,
like
right, yeah,
people's
like-
ability to discern the frequencies
You've
of
been
sound
working with
depends.
him for 30, 40 years, so tell me what you're hearing because, beyond, I mean, at that point, all of us are, regardless, we're in our 20s at that point. So
Yeah.
we ain't been listening to Michael's voice as long as they have, and they seem to believe it hook, line, and sinker, if you believe that, right? That they believed it hook, line, and sinker,
let me just say
whereas
this.
others didn't,
I interviewed the forensic audiologist who did the analysis for Vera that was used to file the lawsuit. And we spoke at length. Like, we spoke for a couple of hours on 2 separate occasions. So, like, 4 hours of conversation in total. And it doesn't all get in the podcast because you can't. But we had a very long discussion with him telling me, like, depending on the age of the person who is listening and depending on their level of musical understanding and whatever their circumstances, all of the different factors that create the person that they are and where they're coming from when they listen will influence how acute they are as a listener. And John Branca, you can say he worked with Michael for 30 years, but did he listen to Michael's music all day, every day for 30 years? That's a factor. He worked with Michael. He knew Michael. Right? But was he a fan of Michael? Was he analyzing and dissecting the anatomy of Michael Jackson's performances on his albums? Like, probably not. And then you have the age factor, and there are multiple factors that you can give someone an excuse to say, okay, so you were of this age, you didn't listen to his music that often, how were you expected to know? But that's why when you have people who are expected to know, like Michael's nephews and his brothers who recorded with him for many, many decades and performed with him, and they know the nuances of what his voice is. They're coming from a different place. You should be able to lower yourself and say, you know better than me, and I'm going to listen to you. And that's what didn't happen. Howard Weitzman actually openly disclosed in the listening session, I'm just a lawyer. I don't have good ears.
Yeah.
I can't tell one way or the other. You guys tell me what you think.
That's my favorite part. I'm just here. I don't know.
Well, that sounds very...
Well, and let me
convenient
interject
and
this.
lawyerly. But anyway.
One. Let me say this. There is a point, and I highlighted it because I wanted to bring it up, and you guys have brought it up for me. There's this notion in your podcast. Somebody talks about it, I don't remember who, but there's a notion that you hear what you expect to hear. So I think a lot of that is pivotal to being able to even carry out this fraud. You're expecting to hear Michael, and so sometimes your brain, it's like, in my opinion, it's like when your brain fills in the vowels, like if you take out all the vowels of the word, but you can still read it. Like, it's kind of the same thing to me with, like, if I say this is Michael Jackson and you listen to it and you're not, like Damien said, you're not tuned into that frequency, you say, oh, close enough. I mean, and there are bits of Michael in there, which makes it even more difficult to decipher. But we will get into the anatomy of the songs right after this break. Don't go away.